You are amoral, are you not? You are feeding off the violence and the despair of the drug trade. You're stealing from those who themselves are stealing the lifeblood from our city. You are a parasite who leeches off
just like you,
the culture of drugs. Excuse me? What?
I got the shotgun. You got the briefcase. It's on the game, though, right?
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Hello, welcome to Caught on the Wire. We're here at the halfway point of Season 2 with an incredible showstopper of an episode, all Prologue. I'm sure you agree. My regular co-host, Alex Cottrell.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm, excited about this episode because it is quite arguably the best episode of Season 2. One of the best of the whole show.
Absolutely. It's just scene after scene after scene of really kind of everything coming together here. So I'm looking forward to discussing this a lot today. And it seems that our viewers are also getting more and more interested in hearing our discussions and discussing with us, as we've received, again, a few more emails this week. So I thought, as is becoming customary on the show, how about we read them out and give credit where credit's due. So we first heard from this week Megan, who says, "Hey guys, I love your podcast. I'm rewatching The Wire now since I was too young to really understand what was going on when it originally aired. I searched out a podcast with recaps and found yours, and I immediately loved it. I normally watch episodes while I play Football Manager, a very short attention span, and your recaps really help with the little things I miss while I'm bringing my beloved Arsenal to glory. Keep up the good work." So very nice to hear from Megan. Nice to hear that she's an Arsenal fan. Not far from my hometown. They're my local team. So we've clearly got some love close to home. Or maybe she is from far afield, but just has a lot of love for Arsenal. So good to hear from Megan.
Yeah, I've heard that the podcast has been a good accompaniment for all sorts of things. I've had people mention driving, for falling asleep to, and now Football Manager.
Falling asleep to, is that a compliment or a chastisement?
I don't know. I sometimes listen to things like that when I'm falling asleep. It depends on the podcast. Some podcasts work for it.
Yeah, you just need
others don't.
I think we're quite laid back, aren't we? We really don't have a...
It's not a very boisterous show, really.
No, definitely not. We, it's kind of a way to almost for us to wind down in the evening and keep our brains active. So, yeah, I can definitely see that working. And we, we've also heard from Tim, who got in contact with us a little bit later this week. And he, along with some others, have been asking about Season 1, and we thought it was probably worth reminding viewers at this point, in case you have joined us recently, that we didn't just skip over Season 1 for no reason at all. On iTunes, it may look that way, but we did do Season 1. The problem is we're not really equipped for the steam that the podcast is picking up at the moment, and we've had to cut our iTunes exposure to limit the bandwidth we're using. So you can go on our website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com, and you'll find that you're able to download or YouTube all of the Season 1 episodes there. So, if you're just thinking of starting a recap, or starting your own rewatch even, and fancy a nice accompaniment for your watching, that would be a great way to get in the swing of it.
Yeah, I mean, our idea on it was that we want the podcast to be freely available to people, and we were willing to put a bit of money into it in order to have the hosting and have the bandwidth. But it's quite pricey past a certain point, so
yeah,
we've kind of reached a point where we're putting in as much as we can in order to kind of keep it free, and that does mean that sometimes the monthly bandwidth gets hit, and some people closer before it, because the bandwidth limit resets every month. So some people who are listening close to the bandwidth resetting may find that they get a message on iTunes when they play it saying something like this user's bandwidth has been exceeded. So we can only apologise for that. We're just not in a position to have any more money going out towards hosting or anything like that. So
Yeah.
but it's very flattering that we've got a decent number of people listening to it, and like you say, we've been very surprised by the number of listens we have been getting. I mean, after about 10 episodes, we had sort of 4,000 or 5,000 downloads, which was amazing. I don't even know where that came from. So
Yeah, there's clearly...
thank you very much.
We're clearly not
Thank you
alone.
very much, and damn you for breaking the server that we're using.
It's a love-hate relationship at this point. But yeah, there's clearly...
It's always love. It's always love.
It's always love. No, there's clearly a lot of people out there that, like us, want this kind of week-to-week, fairly in-depth analysis that The Wire really does deserve, and it's kind of astonishing, as we said in our very first episode, that the show hasn't had something like this yet. I guess the main problem was that it really predates that podcasting explosion, which I think started in 2004 time. So people just weren't quite jumping on the bandwagon with it. But I think, even though the show is very old now, it's about 15 years old. But it's never too late to start podcasting on a show like The Wire. So I'm glad that we're kind of filling that void at the moment.
Yeah, thanks to Tim and Megan for emailing in.
Yeah, definitely. We also had some interest this week from a major kind of TV film review site who were thinking of writing a new article about podcasting. We're looking for our views. We won't be able to say anything more about that at the moment because the article is obviously under construction and needs to be given time to develop. But we were certainly very excited about that, and really shows that we're getting some interest from all sorts of different parts of the internet.
So without further ado,
I
think that's pretty much it.
Our intro sections are kind of expanding, aren't they, as our fans do. So we'll move on to our recap this week, which is, of course, in the realm of Alex. So I'll pass over to you, sir. Did you manage to cut it down to a decent level this week with all the...
Yeah, we've got a few
happening?
smaller sections this week. But... yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was actually quite nicely compartmentalised as an episode. So we've got sort of 3 or 4 really big ones, and then some smaller ones that are broken up, and they're all broken up into little sections. I mean, so yeah, let's get cracking with the recap. And we'll start off the recap for all Prologue with the Gantt Trial. So Omar Little is finally called into court, where he answers honestly about his occupation, and Eileen Nathan questions him. Omar is quick to identify Bird, stating that they served prison time together. Omar identifies Bird's weapon and insults him, saying he was too stupid to dispose of it, which causes Bird to fly into a rage, and he has to be restrained. As they observe the trial, Stringer Bell tells McNulty that word on the street is that Omar was nowhere near the crime scene, but McNulty reminds him that they are not on the street, and that they are in a court of law. And that's the very opening of our trial scene, which we have a few other visits to throughout the episode. But this first one is it's quite a defining moment for Omar. As a character, this is really kind of one of his quoted moments. I think it's one of Michael K. Williams' favourite scenes as well. But in terms of that neutrality and how candid Omar is, and he's so kind of unashamed of what he does, and we're reminded that there is that strange crossover between the street and the law here. You know, McNulty's reminding Stringer that they are in a court of law, but, you know, that doesn't seem to matter too much to Omar. His rules of the street and personal code and rules of survival, it all just kind of blends together for him, and he has this really unique moment here in this scene.
Definitely, yeah. It's a fantastic scene that really feels like we've come full circle from where we started in the show. There's definitely some kind of cyclical things going on here, with the kind of opening with the courtroom scene really having an undeniable link to the pilot. And this time it's just, you know, the next body in an endless chain of revenge and eyes for eyes kind of, witness clipping. So the only reason Gantt is being discussed here in court today is because he turned up to the court session in season 1 and testified. So it kind of, it's kind of going on and on and on. The difference here is that Omar can, kind of end the chain because he he can't exactly be got. He may be testifying, but Omar is kind of an unstoppable force, as The Wire keeps mentioning. So it really is a very, very unusual and out of the comfort zone scene for The Wire. And I think the stuff with McNulty and Stringer, as you mentioned, certainly kind of strengthens that parallel that they're going for with our original court scene. And the irony here that the police this time are the ones using the law to their advantage. The police are doing far more morally objectionable things, I'd say, in this courtroom than the Barksdales are at this point, because I think most people are, pretty convinced that Omar wasn't there, and he's only going on hearsay to get Bird locked up. And oh, how the tides have turned for these Barksdales, where they could intimidate their witnesses back in the day. So it's very good to see everything getting turned on its head.
So there's a couple of other small bits here, especially Omar's knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology. He says that he was into it when he was in middle school. We kind of see this intelligence and that sort of bumbling security officer doing his crossword. And he's very carefully managed to follow Eileen Nathan's rules about anything with a tie. So he's got quite a snazzy sort of tracksuit with his tie just kind of wrapped around, kind of a very basic knot.
I assumed he used a big chunk of that $150, token to grab his suit. Certainly keeping it minimal.
There's more to say about Omar in these scenes, but I might move on to the next section before we go to any of that.
Sure. It's worth mentioning, as you say, about the Greek mythology stuff.
Yes, yeah.
It's something that Ed Burns reports on a lot when they were kind of nailing the show down, particularly for the school scenes, is that when he was a Baltimore schools teacher, at somewhere similar to Tillman Middle, in amongst all the attention deficit, he specifically remembered that it was kind of Greek gods and myths that really captivated the school children in Baltimore. And it really caught their interest and got them excited to do schoolwork. So I guess it's kind of a reference to that, perhaps. That Omar,
it's because the Greek and Roman gods are brutal.
Yeah.
Right? They were petty and they were brutal, and the whole deal was that they weren't meant to be kind of perfect beings. They were sort of really flawed and had their specialities and were always fighting. So that probably appealed to the sort of energetic and reckless minds of Baltimore school children.
Yeah, got their imaginations running wild, I imagine. And it's good to see that Omar is kind of bringing that out in the show through some way or form, and makes it all the more interesting that the showrunners like to describe the show as a Greek tragedy. I guess there's certainly a link there.
Yeah, I was going to say David Simon has mentioned before about that part of people having these destinies and having these paths, and it was very much like Greek tragedies.
Yeah.
Where they were sort of destined to be in a position of disadvantage.
And I think of perhaps all the Wire episodes, this is the one that most strongly spells that out, with people kind of on set courses, with no chance of changing.
Yeah.
As we'll come into later. Yeah.
So should we go to the next section?
Yeah, sure.
So still with the Gantt trial. Levy then questions Omar and reads his arrest record, including a charge for attempted murder that Omar explains away as a shot in the hind parts with no intent to kill. Levy brands him as a violent criminal nonetheless, but is eventually rebuffed when Omar turns around his comment of him being a parasite, stating that they both live off the drug trade. Levy is unable to further discredit Omar as a witness and is left defeated. So the first one was with Eileen Nathan's questioning. And this one is about Levy, and Maury comes back, and we're so used to seeing him in a position of power and taking a terrible situation and making it something magical. And it's interesting, well, magical in sort of evil sense, I suppose. And it's interesting how... hang on, I did this bit. There we are. So it's interesting how Levy makes quite valid points, in the sense that, Omar is to some extent living off misery of other people and exploiting the drug trade, and he's sort of openly admitting to shooting at people, and it's sort of being seen as comical by the jury. But as Omar points out, Levy is not entirely guilt-free, and as a result his words come across as very shallow.
Yeah, definitely. It was great to see Levy put into this place. And I love the way Levy sets it all up with a real big grandstand, and it really feels like he's taking the courtroom into his mental space. The way he goes over to that jury panel for the punchline of his speech, speaks as if he's imparting the jury with these ideas and opinions, and then Omar totally does what he does best. He defies that convention and he knocks him sideways. And the look on Levy's face is priceless, and I love how he kind of looks to Phelan for some sort of moral support, that he's at least on the side of the lawyers in this case. And Phelan has no support to give whatsoever. And it's perhaps quite an obvious scene that points to the Wire's themes quite strongly, but it's one of my all-time favourite scenes on the show, most definitely, I think. Certainly,
we're so used at this point to seeing Levy kind of gets into his stride and starts pontificating, and on this occasion he's cut out very quickly, and his reaction is like he's kind of stunned. He's obviously so not used to being rebuffed in this way. And Omar just turns out to be something that nobody could have expected.
Yeah.
Eileen Nathan and McNulty and Judge Phelan, they must have all just been totally taken aback by how honest and how completely out there Omar was on the stand. They're so used to all this protocol and all this process, and Phelan saying things like the jury is to disregard the thing from the record, and it's all this kind of protocol, and Omar is he's not plugged into that at all.
Yeah, that's certainly a good way to give weight to your testament or testimony, is to if you commit to a dozen other crimes in the process of testifying, such as shooting Mike in his hind parts to, disable him, you're certainly probably not going to lie about anything else. So it's it's just a fantastic moment.
I think that's one of the most appealing things about Omar as a character, is that whereas everyone else in the show, or nearly everyone else in the show, seems very much under pressure, there's sort of anxiety, they've got these problems that they're facing, and they always deal with them in very sort of emotional, very dramatic ways, and that kind of fuels the drama of the show in general. But with Omar, because he's so carefree and so he's not anxious at all, he always feels like he's very comfortable in his space. Even when he's facing problems, he deals with it in a very headstrong manner, and he's very kind of off-the-cuff remarks, and his carefree attitude is what makes him so enjoyable as a character, because it's in such stark contrast to everyone else who's on screen most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't disagree with anything there, really. It's good to see, I guess, Phelan again, for I think the only time we see him this season, popping up at the opportune moment, and we see that he's really turning into a McNulty of the courtroom. And we sense that Levy's found some sort of loophole that's damaging the credibility of Omar's testimony towards the end, that he might be able to, turn the courtroom around with. But Phelan's not having any of it, and decides that Bird needs to get locked up, despite what others might think.
You get the sense that Phelan is grateful for the entertainment.
Yeah,
he seems very kind of weary throughout it, and it's the bits that throw him off that seem to be giving him that enjoyment, like you say, like McNulty.
Yeah, and it's probably that relationship with McNulty in the first season, that kind of rubbed off on him, and changes the way he looks at courtrooms, perhaps, and does let protocol slide if it means that justice does get done, or what we perceive to be justice.
Despite the problems they had together, I think that Phelan did have respect for Jimmy, and I guess he may have wanted to emulate some of his attitudes.
Yeah. And we see that Bird is possibly getting saved. He may not go to prison if he can prove that he is the Messiah come again. I was wondering whether his rapper name, since Bird is a rapper, was some sort of divine rapping name, as they often are, but turns out he's called Onyx in real life. That's his kind of stage rap name, which is a rare type of stone. So didn't quite make the link there.
So, should we move on to the final part of our Gantt Trial section?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so, when the jury returns a guilty verdict, Levy protests, claiming that Omar's testimony was fabricated on a deal with the police department, and calls for an appeal bond, which is then quickly denied by Judge Phelan. After the trial, Nathan gives Omar a get-out-of-jail-free card on any charge up to and including aggravated assault. On his way out of the courthouse, Bird threatens Omar's life, and McNulty asks him if he really saw Bird commit the crime.
Yeah. I love the get out of jail free card. This means that Gantt's murder then goes to help Omar out of prison in season 4.
Yeah, this comes back much, much later, doesn't it? And it's for attempted murder as well.
Yeah,
so.
like it's beyond the aggravated assault by a huge slump. Although I think it only gets him moved to I think it's more of a high security facility so that he's not at risk of being stabbed in this kind of really down and dirty prison where he's absolutely hated by everyone. So there's some pretty grim scenes in that part of the show. But I guess it just shows how William Gantt's legacy kind of sustains across the whole season. And that, get out of jail free card is the direct kind of next story piece of this kind of Gantt strand, which is, it's pretty cool to see that really long form storytelling.
A very satisfying moment for Omar as well, of course, because he's finally getting his revenge for what Bird contributed to with Brandon.
Yeah, it's very true. So that's kind of a full circle for Omar.
So he's done Stinkum, he's sorted out Bird, Weebay's in prison. He's kind of, he's sorted out now all the perpetrators of the crime on Brandon. He's got it all wrapped up.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. I forgot
and
about the
pretty much
trio.
under the protection of the law in this case, which is incredible.
He's done well.
He's done very well. So yeah, that's the Gantt trial. So if we move on to the next large section,
Sure.
which is our Sobotka detail, and it starts with Daniels reviewing the information that is detailed as gathered so far. And Freeman reports that Frank Sobotka lives within his means while the union books show a decline in membership and difficulty meeting their debts. Prez and Freeman describe a paper trail through campaign finance records linking the union to $70,000 in contributions. Herc reports that they have established no ties so far between drug dealers and the union. Then B.D. Russell suggests that the union is making extra money by facilitating smuggling in and out of the port. The meeting concludes as Daniels reassigns Greggs and Prez to focus on the vice trade, and Freeman to work with Russell and Bunk looking at container movements. So this is the scene where we have the road map of the Sobotka detail being laid out in front of us and what we can expect everyone to be doing.
Yeah, so they're really up and running now, and we see where Freeman and Prez's finance investigation got them last week. Seeing that Sobotka has no flash, as that makes sense, but that his smuggling operation and its political donations are leaving a paper trail for those persistent enough to find it. It's not kind of a completely foolproof system they've got going on at the moment. And this instantly turns Valchak's empty accusations into something more convincing. He's a lucky man that he's kind of, his very petty hate has come round to actually mean something in legal terms.
And that was his suspicion in the first place, wasn't it? If Valchak believed that Frank Sobotka had to be into some dirt. So there was the pettiness of it, but he also went in with a suspicion, and he's turned out to be right.
Yeah, definitely. He's quite lucky for that matter, really, because he assumed that rather than devotion to the church, it was more out of just crime and illegitimate sources of money. So he chose correctly at the end of the day, even if it was kind of a very hasty decision.
And it's because they talk about the following the money, and they see that obviously the union, despite being in quite a poor state of financial affairs, is paying money in towards PACs, which I believe is political action committees.
Okay.
It's like sort of American lobbying organisations.
Yeah.
So they're sort of paying money to get strength of the union in political movements, but obviously that doesn't line up with the quite poor financial state that they've got. So yeah, they've kind of let that one slip, because they mentioned something about union records being available. They sort of go straight to the government, or they're available to the public, or something like that. They mentioned that they were able to get hold of the records with ease.
That's right, yeah.
Whereas later on, when they're trying to get it from like the political spectrum, and they're doing the subpoena for records for all those major developers and everything, it's kind of a much longer, more arduous process. But here they get it with very quickly.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. So that, and it kind of, speaks to the importance of these stevedores, that their books are available. So if someone does want to make a case against you, there's not really anything in place to stop you from doing it. And that's what Frank said last week, actually. Our books have been open to the Justice Department for, I think it was 8 years, behind some scandal back then. So.
Oh yeah, because they mention it in this scene as well, don't they? They mention some kind of legislator or something like that passed, and after the scandal, they now made it available.
Yeah, and there's there's so much money in development now that there's not really any way to stop them with a subpoena, or that you certainly got to work a lot harder to it. So yeah, it all comes full circle.
And Beadie brings forward her suggestion about the smuggling using the computers and everything, that the checkers are the ones that are involved. And she kind of brings that forward from her approach to Maui. And the fact that he kind of gave her a bit of a tip-off. So she's kind of brought that in. Yeah,
and she's totally on the right track. Obviously, she's a
detective. That's detective work right there.
She's got that insight from the day-to-day, patrolling around these docks, that it kind of makes sense in her head. She can kind of see it from their point of view more than the detectives can. So in this case, she was a very useful part of the detail, or component of it.
And then later on, there's the bit right at the end where Herc asks Beadie if she wants to go out for coffee.
Yeah.
And she kind of silently declines.
Yeah.
And then Carver makes fun out of him and kind of does an impression of him. And Herc's response is something like, "Oh, I was going to ask if she wanted to make soup from her panties or something," which Carver is visibly really disgusted by, which I thought was quite funny. But his, Herc's approach to Beadie, it's not clear whether it's meant to be 100% serious or not, but.
Yeah,
I think I would be kind of horrified as well if that was kind of what he was being serious about.
He didn't even wait for 5 seconds after the meeting. It was an incredibly kind of forceful approach, wasn't it? So this guy's not wasting any time, I guess.
And then they continue to have quite an open conversation about it immediately after, with Beadie 5 meters away.
Yeah, these guys don't have...
Sound doesn't travel in that office, clearly.
Well, there's just no dignity in that office. Right, where does the Sobotka detail go next?
Okay, so then Greggs meets with Shardine to ask for help tracking down Eastern European girls working in the vice trade. Later, Greggs discusses her strip club assignment with Cheryl, who is jealous and angry that Greggs has returned to detective work, and insists on accompanying her to the strip club. Shardine's friend at the club is willing to help because her earnings are threatened by the imported girls, and she tells the detectives that the girls are badly paid and given no freedom whatsoever. After visiting the club, Greggs takes Cheryl to the port and explains how the girls died. So the very first part of that is when we see Shardine again, and she's obviously doing a lot better for herself. She's kind of one of the very few people in the show that has a kind of genuinely happy ending.
Yeah, and this is...
And it kind of starts now. It kind of, it comes up a bit more later on in the show, and we do see her a few more times. But here, she seems quite settled down, and that's almost why I think we don't see much of her, because there's not a lot of mileage on the wire for jolly stories.
Yeah, definitely. They couldn't really fit any more in, could they? And as you say, Shardine's story has pretty much ended. We do see her once again, literally in the final episode. I think she comes to Lester's wake. But that's it. She is one of the few success stories, along with Bubbles, and I don't think I can think of anyone else, to be honest. But yeah, it's nice to see her again, and she's certainly looking a lot better, a lot more spruced. And
isn't she doing a nursing course or something
right, yeah.
like that?
She's training to be a nurse, and she's in a bloody beautiful house. Freeman's house looks pretty exquisite from the little glimpse we get of it. And as you might expect, has some very kind of exquisite furniture.
Yeah.
They're not miniature-sized.
But normal size furniture.
Yeah, normal-sized. He does do a trade in that as well, occasionally.
That would be really funny. You go to Freeman's house, it's just covered in tiny little furniture, and he's like, "Sit down."
Yeah. Yeah.
He becomes this like really creepy kind of. It'd be like a horror film with these tiny chairs. I said, sit down.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's like that Simpsons episode with Mr. Burns and his tiny model plane. He's like telling Smithers to get in the plane. I said, hop in.
That would certainly be an interesting spin-off, wouldn't it? If Freeman got his own show and we find out his dirty secrets.
But I digress.
And then another domestic setting appears, Kima and Cheryl.
Yeah.
Where
And Cheryl's still with her reservations about Kima going back to the detective work, and I guess you can see it from Cheryl's point of view is that she's already had to deal with Kima getting shot, and there is all this danger, and I guess she can't really understand, despite Kima's best efforts, why she wants to get back involved in it all, and she's so enthusiastic to get her hands dirty.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of stress that she doesn't want. She wants to settle down. She wants to have that security. So yeah, like you say, another kind of domestic, a lot more positive than the scene before it, but
negative. Yeah.
a lot more negative. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not looking good with these two, and I can't really add to what you said. Really, you kind of nailed it perfectly there. It's just a conflict of interests that isn't going to resolve itself. That no one's willing. Well, I think that there is compromise. Kima certainly did go on the paper trail for at least a few months, we assume, but as she said, she heard the music, she's going to dance, and she can't keep appeasing her wife. She has to go do things she wants after a while.
And clearly she wasn't going to give up the chance to work with that detail again.
No. It's
considering what it was last time. I mean, it was very satisfying for everyone involved. Clearly they all probably jumped at the chance to get back with it again.
Yeah. Although it is interesting to see how Cheryl does seem at least a little bit won over later on when Kima takes her to the docks to show her, the containers that these girls were found in. And you do see on Cheryl's face that this is an important job that, my girlfriend is working. And I don't think that's going to, make me like the fact that she's doing it, but I can certainly see why someone needs to do it. It's a pretty horrible situation.
It's quite an analytical reading of her facial expression in that scene. I mean, honestly, I just thought that that she kind of clocked it and didn't say anything out of respect, and like you say, kind of understood the seriousness of what Kima was doing and what she was contributing to, but I didn't really get the sense that it won her over at all. I think that she just kind of saw it as something that other people should deal with, not Kima. Like, she understood it was serious, but it still didn't seem like she wanted to have Kima get involved in any way.
Yeah,
her silence seemed more out of kind of respect than a change of heart.
Yeah, certainly.
But then the next bit that we actually have chronologically, because we obviously jumped kind of to the end there, but the next part we have is we join Prez and Cheryl and Kima in the strip club, and Prez is looking very uncomfortable. Says that he can't look at them because he's never been there with other women.
Yeah,
so,
I
can't imagine Prez sort of visiting a strip club casually, don't know.
No, I don't think it's just the fact that he was with women. I don't think it's just his thing in general, is it? They're here at night shift, as Damon, one of our listeners, reliably informs us. And yeah, it certainly looks a little bit more lively than Orlando's. And I love the club worker that they go and find at the back, Chardine's
yeah, she's
friend.
Great.
And we see that for almost all of these girls, that there's no kind of ideal career path here, but it's just what she refers to as got to get paid sort of thing. It's just a process by which she can keep on living.
Because she actually says that she hasn't seen Chardine in there in a while, so she must be doing well.
Of any of the Eastern European sex workers that are smuggled over here, and she gives pretty graphic descriptions of how these girls are treated by their pimps.
And it's interesting that she actually says that Chardine must be doing well because she hasn't seen her in there for a while. So there is this association that she understands that there is a certain desperation to the job, but clearly a professional says that she's got clientele and she needs to go and get paid. And I think it's very funny when she says she's like, "Oh, the bitches in here, they are no joke." And Prez's reaction face on that is hilarious. It's so good. It is almost like The Office or something like that, the way it kind of turns to him, and he's just got this really kind of like,
stiff cringe going on, isn't
yeah, it's excellent.
It's pretty great.
But it also highlights, a certain reinforcement of Cheryl's viewpoint on the whole thing, which is that, it's no joke and it's quite serious and it's a very dark underbelly of the city, and that's what Cheryl doesn't want Kima to be involved in. Yeah,
and they seem to give us two really random, mundane scenes after this, where they show D'Angelo flushing something down the toilet, and then the detail doing some computer monitoring. And I don't know if they were just trying to point out how this sex worker malarkey is certainly a very intense job, and they're really comparing it to these kind of mundane tasks that these other characters are going through, perhaps. With a very convincing yawn from BD, just to make the point even clearer.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so the third strand is Russell shows Bunk and Daniels how to use computers to track container movements. And Bunk eventually gets frustrated with the tedium and goes to drink with McNulty. He later tells him that he thinks Colonel Rawls expects him to clear the cases or he will force him out of the unit. McNulty then tells Bunk he is done pretending to be a detective and that he's going to make another go of things with Elena. The next day, Russell, Freeman, and a very hungover Bunk Moreland report that they have linked all of the missing containers to Horseface, but Daniels is still reluctant to fold the Jane Doe murders into his investigation despite the link. So yeah, the first part is what you mentioned, where it's talking about how mundane all of it's going on while they're sitting at their computers. And they have to go through sort of all those years and years of records.
It looks pretty grim, doesn't it? Because they have to go through every single container movement, and it looks like that system, once you click on the can, it takes about 5 seconds to arrive in the truck, and then you can see its kind of info. So it's clearly going to be an absolute mammoth task. They have to go through hundreds of ships across, quite a few years here. So I think they must have done a lot of quick skipping, because they seem to get to the bottom of it pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, they do seem to very effectively get through it all. I was also going to mention that I like The Wire's effort to produce realistic, computer displays. It seems to be a trope amongst police shows and just kind of TV dramas in general, that whenever they show computer screens or phone screens or anything, there's kind of always a massive simplification of everything and sort of totally ludicrous software and everything, just for the purposes of getting whatever needs to be done on the computer screen. But always the equipment that they use in the detail, including the phone software that they had for the wiretap in the first season, and now especially what they have for the checking of the containers going off and on the ships. There's a kind of attention to detail. I don't know whether they're using actual software or it's just kind of mock-ups, but I kind of like that it is very technical and looks like the actual software that they could be using. It's kind of something that you don't necessarily think about, but it's also something that a lot of TV shows don't go the effort to make look convincing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with that. And, often TV shows...
makes it seem a lot more tangible.
Yeah, they'll often go for the crazy typing cliche as well, won't they? When to perform one simple click, you have to press 20 keystrokes within the space of half a second and make it all kind of geeky. But there's
reminds me of something like 24, where they mash the keypad for 5 seconds and they're like, we're connecting to their uplink.
Just assuming your viewers are complete morons and don't know how to do basic computer tasks.
Ooh, harsh. Our good friend James is a big fan of 24.
It has his merits.
It's entertaining. It's very entertaining. It's just the computer stuff and all of that kind of... It's just... I guess it kind of knows that it's a bit ludicrous, really. But anyway.
Yeah, no, so
it's a nice little bit of effort being put in by the show's creators there, and I just liked the attention to detail.
I imagine it must have cost them quite a lot to put the XP interface on, into the show, because most of the time you see shows have their own kind of OS or some very fictional search engine that they use to do things, and the Wire, with its authenticity, had to use MSN search, and it had to have the XP Windows suppose.
I don't think they paid. They probably
Yeah.
were supported by Microsoft in that, because at the time, if you consider when this went out, it would have been a time when they would have wanted MSN to be promoted, because that was very much the rise and... Oh, well, I say rise, it never really rose
Yeah.
much, but it was, that was kind of like when it was growing in popularity, and
It was very popular back then, yeah.
certainly MSN Messenger was, but they were going for that whole MSN network, weren't they, Microsoft Server Network, and so they probably got the okay from Microsoft, and maybe even got support from it, because they're essentially advertising what was their kind of new product at the time.
Because this was the year that XP came out, actually, wasn't it? 2003.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And we see that Freeman finds a way to speed the process up and make it more entertaining by playing ball on the wall. I don't know what you call that game, but
It's like the thing from Great Escape, where he's in the prison cell and
that's
throwing
it.
the ball against the wall.
That's it. And keeping Bunk on the edge of his seat throughout the entire job, I thought was pretty damn funny.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression that when Freeman did it, he was getting his own back. He was just doing it to kind of demonstrate how
Yeah.
ridiculous it was that he was kind of doing it right next to where he was working.
And it even forces Bunk to take half a day off and go and get drunk with McNulty, as you said. So it's
So yeah, then they end up having a nice scene where we have McNulty and Bunk with their usual drinking by the tracks, and they have a bit of another heart-to-heart, albeit a very alcohol-laden
yeah. It's been a while
one.
since we've had one of these drinking by the track scenes.
Yeah. And McNulty tears up that photo, finally kind of gives up on the case.
Yeah, we see that.
Especially after having visited the morgue and kind of just had to give it up, really. Jane Doe to the end.
And he seems to give up on his boating as well. He almost, claims that, he's now into real retirement. And it makes sense that therefore his big undertaking or motivation now is Elena. That's like the only thing he has left to try and salvage. So that's kind of, I guess we're moving into the McNulty section a little bit here, but that's, it all makes sense that he's just trying to find any sort of constructive activity to get on with here.
Quite an alarming moment where Bunk gets out his service pistol and kind of does that mock aiming at the bottle.
Yeah, that was, even Jimmy seemed to, find pretty problematic, or certainly disconcerted with it. Although he did redeem himself by he had a fantastic reaction to Jimmy's wife speech. He just didn't quite know how to respond to it. It's just fantastic kind of, oh shit.
It's just kind of, I understand that this is big news.
Those big open arms.
I will react accordingly.
Yep. So, that's pretty good. And then obviously he pays the price with the bin the next day. As I've been saying, season 2 is Bunk at the very best, and
he really drags it out with all the noises, and everyone's kind of making very kind of glances left and right. Daniel was kind of completely.
Isn't this horribly uncouth? Like, why isn't he leaving the room? Like, he's like, no one's here to watch you vomit, Bunk. Like, come on, like, just go to the toilet.
I'm going to give that report if it's the last thing I do.
Yeah, he's clearly the Jane Doe's is really taking the toll now.
Well, he was given the offer to take the time off, but no, he soldiered on.
Yeah, because he's got nothing to live for back at home. We never really see much of Bunk's domestic life, but we understand that things between him and, is it Nadine, his wife, are very turbulent, to say the least.
And then this is also the beginning of things to come with Horseface now that he's been linked to the missing containers.
Yeah. And they've kind of finished this strand by talking about the next step, which is going to be cloning the computer. And we're still yet to get a mention of, the wire. They haven't quite set up the wire yet that's going to catch them the baddies like it did last time, but we will get there. It's a slow-moving season, this one.
So let's take a look at McNulty's actions in this episode.
Yeah.
Just the one section for this. McNulty visits his wife's real estate business and amuses her by undressing the store mannequin while she talks to clients. He manages to talk her into coming to dinner with him, and then at the dinner, Elena parries McNulty's attempts to rekindle their relationship by propositioning him for sex. The next morning, She asks him to leave before their sons see him and think the family is back together. So we have the short scene with at the beginning with she's talking to that couple, presumably about some properties they're interested in, and Dominic West has a great time sort of undressing that mannequin and having a play around. Well, that's worth mentioning, I think, that the couple, when they leave, they don't seem all that surprised that the mannequin is now kind of undressed. Because they do look at it and it's just kind of like, tits out kind of sort of very suddenly.
Yeah, McNulty seems to be...
The evidence of McNulty's handiwork is very clear.
Yeah, they seem to be a bit gormless, didn't they? Like, Elena was really not hiding her amusement very well, and that.
And she's like not even listening to them, and they're just kind of like
they're just
carrying on,
they're just
regardless.
Really, really want to buy a house, and they're not going to let anything stop them. But yeah, you'd have thought that they'd have at least turned around and enjoyed the show as well. But perhaps they were just on another planet at that point.
Thinking about their house.
Where they can come in under the asking price. Is that the same as... I didn't think they said that. She said that for Nick and Amy, but maybe it's a different area.
And then eventually they end up at dinner together. It seems like McNulty gets a slight victory by getting her to come on a bit of a date with him, but doesn't really end up coming for all that he wants. They end up having a bit of sex, a fuck for the road, as she puts it. And we have another sort of sudden cut to a sex scene. There are a lot of those in The Wire. They don't kind of like build up to sex scenes in The Wire. It's always like, sex scene, surprise. And we kind of have that. But then when she comes down in the morning, he's there with the paper, thinks that he's finally back at home, pipe and slippers style. And he's very quickly oiked out.
Yep, burn.
It seems like Elena, she, the fact that she had sex with him was kind of... She didn't want to get into the emotional stuff. She just, wanted to satisfy their primal urges, and then that was it. That was the end of it. Yeah. McNulty kind of still got himself convinced that he's got a foot in the door here.
Yeah, it was a bit of a stinky moment for McNulty. You do kind of feel for him. It was, I do love the whole Elena McNulty sequence in this episode, and the Strand. I really like the restaurant scene. It's the deepest the show ever gets into their marriage and the dynamic of it, and the three things that Elena hated about him, which was the drinking, the work, and the women. It's easy to see through McNulty's facade that he's gotten over those. He doesn't really do the best job of making it obvious that he's still in the same boat essentially, and he. Talks about, on a good day I catch crabs and count seagulls. It sounds very divine and serene, and as you were talking about last week, the kind of classical music in the background almost lulls you into this false sense of security that things might just be getting patched up and moving in the right direction. And then, boom, as you say, just here comes the sex. Here comes the fuck for the road that is, just empty. There's not actually anything being built here. It's just, a primal urge, as you say. So it just really shows that, if McNulty really wanted to get it back together, perhaps he wouldn't have jumped at the proposition. He would have, declined it and, suggested that that's not what I want. I want something that, I want to get back together properly. So there's a lack of long-term will and desire to build anything that's good for him, I guess, with McNulty. And that's something that we always see him going wrong with.
That said, I think... it's somewhat doubtful, especially given, his response in this case, it's somewhat doubtful that if they did try and make another go of it, that McNulty would automatically kind of suddenly become this man of the house and very well behaved and everything, because, I don't know, that's just not really who he is. It's like Kima, she's the same, like, even if she does try to adopt that kind of position, she doesn't keep it for very long. I have a feeling McNulty would be the same.
And, Elena definitely sees that. Even though I don't think McNulty knows that, but it's just the way he's kind of ingrained, isn't he? He's kind of built to be like that.
Comes back to that Greek tragedy idea where the characters are on these destined paths, and that no matter what actions they take, and again, this is why it's so brilliant, as it ties in with what D'Angelo says about the past being what really makes you who you are. It's the fact that he's taken all of these actions already, he can't undo them. That's who he is.
And here he is,
And there's the case for quite a few characters
He's
in this
denied
episode.
his second act, just like D'Angelo is. So yeah, it all feeds into a nice theme.
But we'll obviously discuss that more when we get to the prison scenes with D'Angelo. But until then, let's take a look at the Greeks. So Nick Sobotka meets with Spiros and his drug lieutenant Eton, and they discuss the chemicals. Nick asks for help with Ziggy's problems with Cheese. Vondas offers to kill Cheese, but Nick says that he's not looking for a war and that Ziggy is in the wrong. Later, Nick accompanies Sergei to a meeting with Cheese, and Sergei reports that he has negotiated with him and that he'll talk to Prop Joe to compensate Ziggy for Cheese destroying his car. Sergei arranges a meeting with Prop Joe at his electronics shop, and there Sergei vouches for Nick, and Joe eventually agrees to compensate Ziggy, but largely because he happens to understand problems with family members. And there's a really wonderful moment with Prop Joe here, as is pretty much with every scene with Prop Joe. He really does kind of remind Nick exactly who it is that he's dealing with, and his wonderful turn of phrase about them, they would be cadaverous motherfuckers if it weren't for Sergei.
Yeah, he's an absolutely fantastic character.
I want Prop Joe to be my uncle.
Yeah, he is the ultimate wise old dude. And this is Prop Joe as I like to know him, like more eccentric, on top form. Unlike his season 1 persona, which feels a bit different,
flat,
doesn't it? It feels a bit more street and a bit less kind of unique. So it feels like he really added some depth to his character during his absence between the seasons. And we get our first shit, I think, in the show, which is a fan favourite word that the show keeps coming back to, particularly once Clay Davis becomes notable.
The stripper at the club says shit
so
as well.
It's being dotted around. It's coming into, but I think there's that one at the start of season 4 which kind of ends. It's the sheet to end all sheets that everyone absolutely loves with Sidner, and it's been.
I'm sure there's a compilation on YouTube somewhere.
It's
of
been
all
remixed
of them,
50 million times, I'm sure, but it's.
My favourite is the vocoder version. I think I posted it on the on the page once.
Dear. Those sheets are for another day, though.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of a negotiation going on here, and Prop Joe kind of sympathises that he has his own problems with family members, and also we see this little electronics shop that he's in for the first time, and it's a place that we visit again and again across the show with Prop Joe's appearance.
Yeah, definitely. It's Prop Joe's very humble front. Certainly more logical place to go than a funeral parlour, perhaps. And it's good to see Sergei in there as well. I think this is a great episode for really adding depth to Sergei. There's 2 fantastic scenes with the guy. First of all, the cheese intimidation scene, which is really, badass is the word, I guess.
It's great to see it from Nick's perspective.
Yeah, it's very curious how we don't see.
The Sergei is so effective.
Yeah, they really had a big moment there to really, create some drama. And as you say, they chose to stick in the car with Nick, because Nick is ultimately one of our grounding characters, and I guess they always want us to be with him and see how he reacts to things. And
it's kind of a shame, really, because Sergei is such a kind of quite menacing character, but I don't think we ever really see him in action. There's that bit at the near the beginning of season 2 where there's that car chase and they go and bundle that guy into a car, but we kind of don't really see Sergei in action to that extent, even though he is very much the muscle. He is kind of the action man of the Greeks organisation. And we are sort of separated from his showdown with Cheese here. I would have loved to know what he was saying. Because it seems like, of all the people in the show that you really wouldn't want to mess with, I think Sergei's got to be up there.
Yeah.
It's very intimidating.
You can hear their exchange if you really whack up the volume, as I did. I think it's just, I think he keeps saying, fucking white guy. Is all I heard. I think so.
But there's an element of montage to it, because it keeps cutting to Nick, and it's kind of, sort of skipping forward slight bits maybe, but yeah, I think if you crank it up, you can probably make out roughly what he's saying.
And you really sense Nick's kind of excitement / adrenaline at like the newfound power that he has, now that he's got this relationship with Spiros and Spiros' henchman, and he's really done something that's having real consequences on the street here. So you kind of sense that through that scene.
Nick seems very comfortable with Spiros now. They seem to have a very kind of effective working relationship, whereas before he was still, he was always quite down to earth and kind of measured about the whole thing, but there was a level of apprehension. But now he seems to have a very comfortable working relationship. He's very candid and sociable when he meets Eton.
Yeah.
And obviously Spiros is very endeared to him because he's smart and he explains why he doesn't want Cheese killed. And I like the fact that Spiros is just like, if you want, we kill him. Like, he's just kind of straight up like that. It's kind of that's Spiros all over. But yeah, he seems kind of like he's found a path here, such as it is. He's obviously happy to be getting involved with something that's getting him some serious cash.
Definitely.
And this is the first appearance of Eton, isn't it? We do
right,
see him a few more times throughout the show, I think. Kind of the Israeli lieutenant.
That's right, yeah. I think we've seen most of their kind of major crew. I think there's still the Madame that we haven't seen yet. The one, the lady who looks after all their sex workers. But
yeah,
we've seen most of them. And it's good to see. So I think there was another good Sergei scene, wasn't there, where, we've already talked about that Prop Joe scene, but there's always that interesting line, supermarkets are cathedrals in America, which feels quite insightful.
Yeah, he kind of makes quite a funny jab at Prop Joe, doesn't he?
You're losing weight.
And that's what prompts our famous line.
Yeah. So
let's move on to the next part.
That didn't include the heroin stuff at the end, did it? Or okay, excellent.
No, I'm about to do that bit now. So Nick delivers the chemicals to Eton and Vondas, and they offer to pay him with drugs. Nick opts to take half the payment in cash and the rest in drugs, but Nick refuses to let Ziggy get involved with the package after the trouble he caused with the last one. Johnny 50 declines to be involved with the drugs at all. This is the short little scene that we have at the end, where the chemicals finally get delivered.
It's cool to see that this scene starts with the truck backing into the garage, which is an immediate cut from McNulty and Elena having sex. So I thought it was quite a nice kind of. don't know if that's tenuous.
If you say so, that's an
I
interesting
thought it was
segue.
a pretty nice park the car in the garage. It's an old age metaphor. I'm always looking for these transitions that the Wire loves.
Freudian transitions.
I'm claiming this one. I'm claiming this one for my own. But down to the meat of the scene. Interesting of Spiros to suggest the whole half and half thing. You don't really know what his intentions are by, questioning that or posing that. Are they looking for a potential recruit in Nick, or are they just doing it out of kindness, or are they doing it out of harm? Because it's quite a you're really opening a can of worms by dangling that in front of Nick, and you're opening up his weaknesses and his temptations there. So making his mind run wild with ideas, I guess.
Especially considering his aversion to getting involved with drugs previously. I can't, they're most likely aware of that and maybe want to pull him into it because, like you say, they want people to be on side. They probably consider it viable to have people involved in all different parts of the business. So yeah, Nick decides to kind of take a slightly more cautious option purely for the amount of money he could be making out of it. And Ziggy's very enthusiastic that drugs are getting involved. He kind of pushes that deal slightly, but doesn't. Again, he just ends up getting treated like a child and...
stay home and watch the cartoons.
It's kind of left there. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the Daniels-esque compromise of the half and half. It's I guess it's quite a smart option to go with. And I'm very glad that Nick decides to do it on his own this time. Don't take Ziggy near anything. That's one lesson you learn from season 2. He just sets.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the it's not the last straw, but it's kind of one of those moments that is going to contribute to the breaking of Ziggy. And the fact that he does get cut out of it, and then there's finally that moment where he keeps being insulted by Gleekass. And then that's kind of when he has his breakdown and starts to go and shoot up the place. So, but yeah, this is kind of one of those moments that is going to really kind of push Ziggy, because not only has he kind of run out of options, as we establish later, with his own family, and he's not even getting the support from Frank, but now he's getting cut out of the illegal stuff that he's getting involved in as well. I mean, where does that leave him? So
Yeah.
Things get pretty desperate for Ziggy as time passes on, and I think that's to be expected, especially considering how he acts. But we'll see more of that in the next section. Well, in the next major section.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway.
Okay, let's move on to it.
So yeah, we're going to get into the union business. And Frank Sobotka chairs a meeting with his union about their political aims. Nat Coxon is sceptical about the usefulness of dredging the canal and their chances of restarting the grain pier. Nat urges the Checkers to start to contact their legislators. After the meeting, he tells Frank that he knows he must be getting money from another source and warns him to be careful. This is one of the not all that regular sort of appearance of the Union Hall. It's like a meeting hall, and they kind of have everyone there, and there's Horseface, and everyone's kind of congregated. There's quite a nice little scene where we see a bit of union action.
It gets us back to that central friction that that's at the heart of this union business strand, and has been ever since the start. And this idea of Team Ott, who wants to push for the more attainable short-term fix with saving the grain pier from the condominium developers, and then Frank still doing the long-term push for that canal dredging, which will see much larger ships being able to dock at Baltimore once again. So it's who's more of a visionary or who's more of a realist. I guess it's tricky to. And we see real two camps emerging here. And I think, is there not some sort of union re-election thing that comes up later on in the season, where it's really kind of Ott versus Frank?
Yeah, I believe so, because you do get a sense, especially in this scene, that although Frank is kind of meant to be the chair or the treasurer or whatever his kind of official title is, Ott is, he fancies himself to be in that position as well. He kind of has a leadership stake, even though, he isn't officially titled as such. He seems to want to drive that idea forward and protect his interests and protect those who share the same interests, and that obviously leads to a bit of a sort of a political battle later on within the union. And then, I think there is like a sort of re-election moment at some point. I don't remember it all that well, actually. I
can just remember the poster. Like the poster's kind of ingrained in my mind, but the actual election stuff, I'm not sure if it happened. And we see that Frank is rightfully encouraging his guys that the money is coming in through various donations and government help, but Ott's really getting sceptical about this as the days go by, and the tent.
It is quite a flaky response, isn't it, to sort of suddenly have this quite a large amount of capital to be giving towards political contributions, and he just kind of explains it away quite casually. Are we, lucky to get a few donations, and that's it. So
it's just another element of stress added to his life now that his own guys are starting to question his integrity. This then goes on to the Ziggy at the bar scene, right? Is that... Yeah.
Yeah, so the next section we have is at Dolores' bar. And Frank buys around, whilst Little Big Roy and Horseface tell stories. Nick arrives to give Ziggy his compensation, and Ziggy immediately buys a round for the bar and burns some of the money to light a cigarette. Frank leaves the bar, but meets him outside. They take a walk to the wharf, and he questions Ziggy about where he is getting money from. Ziggy then reminisces about his childhood, and Frank admits that maybe he should have let Zig go to community college. So the opening bit is Frank arriving. We kind of hear that crazy story between Little Big Roy and Horseface, and I still don't quite catch the gist of what they're talking about. Maybe I'm kind of not concentrating enough when they're talking about it, but every time I've seen that scene quite a few times now, having just kind of watched the show through, and I don't think I could retell that story to you.
It's a bit of in-joke banter, I guess. Those sort of scenes, they classically drop you in the middle of the joke, don't they? So you kind of hear the punchline, but not the setup. So you're almost a bit lost from the start. But I know what you mean.
And then Nick arrives and he has his money for Ziggy, and like just immediately Ziggy acts like a complete twat and just is like the moment the money is in his hand, he kind of goes from despondent to, everything's absolutely okay now. I've got all this money. I'm going to burn $100 bill and light a cigarette with it kind of attitude. And then it's really hard to, after kind of sympathizing him the way he sometimes gets treated and spoken to and the difficulty of his situation, it just all goes down the plug hole if he's going to behave that way.
He's ridiculously off the rails we see here, and there's just no sense of relief. Like last episode, this guy was genuinely fearful that he might die within the next week, and as soon as that goes away, there's no sense of relief. It's like he's allergic to positive emotions.
He just learns nothing.
There's no sense of anything, and he's then annoyed that he didn't get more money out of Cheese, despite the fact that he spent the whole last week trying to find money to pay him back. And of course, as you say, there's he seems to want to buy one for the bar. Copying his dad almost. It's kind of his dad laid down that precedent, and he needs to impress his dad or live up to his standards, and he goes really the wrong way about it, and burning that $100 bill is just absolutely ridiculous. It almost seems...
Although maybe not intentional, he does make a bit of a nod towards the criminal activity in order to get money, doesn't he? If it's good enough for his father, it's good enough for him. And there's kind of like that sense that obviously, he's whether he's doing it intentionally or not, it's a bit of a reference to the criminal activity undertaken in order to get that money. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that the scene really tries to make the point that Ziggy's desire to make it generally stems from wanting to please his dad, who's not shown him enough reinforcement, perhaps, over the time. And, he more or less admits it here. If my dad can do it, then so can I.
Yeah, and then that kind of brings us on to the walk and talk that they have, and they end up down by the wharf. And although Frank doesn't really probe all that hard about where Ziggy's getting the money from, he probably thinks it best not to know exactly. But they have a bit of a heart-to-heart, or at least as much as they can do, because they never seem particularly close. I mean, they're very kind of clearly separated in this scene, aren't they? They stood quite far apart. The camera goes to some way to kind of put them separately in shot, this kind of like headshot, this sort of reverse shot with them, and it makes a bit of a concerted effort to put the distance between the two characters, and they don't seem close. They never seem to be. They never kind of shake hands or hug. I think the only time Frank punches is when Frank punches him. That's like the most contact they make.
I think they do have to really stretch to pass a cigarette between them, so that they do share something, but it's not at arm's length.
That's the olive branch, isn't it, in the unions?
Yeah,
it's a
so
cigarette.
I guess it's also quite symbolic that they choose to stroll down to the docks, a very dilapidated part of the docks, just for their chat as well, just to point out the kind of problems with their relationship. And it really feels like this scene has been brewing up the whole season. Surprising that they kind of spit it out halfway through. They thought it might be something they save up for a big kind of emotional outburst at the end, but they don't. And we also get something that we were talking about in another week, the idea of a different future or other opportunities for employment. And Frank suggests that perhaps Ziggy should have been sent to community college like his brother was. And I can only assume that perhaps he has a younger brother who was growing up at a time when the docks were much more obviously not a future career endeavour for kids. And they perhaps got him out quick and did, throw him down a different path into something more relevant. And I can also imagine Ziggy being too much of a troubled kid to be cut out for going to college also. So there's a few things to consider here, really. But he does have that kind of chaotic intelligence that we've seen throughout the show. So there's a lot going on there, really, and they never explain much of it, but I like the fact that we can really interpret and put our own spin on these things.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of family history that's being laid out but not fully described, and like you say, it's nice to try and put the pieces together in an imaginary sense.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the prison and the Barksdale business, which is our last major section. And the first part, which is quite a big one, D'Angelo flushes his remaining drugs down his cell toilet. That was one of those mundane moments that you mentioned earlier. He then attends a book group in the prison library and discusses Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. D'Angelo offers a sophisticated analysis of the novel, asserting that a person can never escape his past no matter what he fronts, in order to establish another persona. Later, Brianna visits D'Angelo and tries to persuade him to use Avon's setup of Tillman to shave time from his sentence. He refuses, saying that Avon's actions were evil, and he reminds his mother that she taught him to stand up for himself from an incident when he was younger. He also refuses to get out of prison, given what she taught him, and how he took the main fall for the Barksdale organisation. He then asks her to tell Stringer, Avon and Danette to leave him alone. D'Angelo then passes Avon in the corridor and refuses to talk to him.
Ooh. So we have...
So if we start with that book group scene, it's an interesting fact that the book group leader is Richard Price, who is a sort of writer, and he's a writer on the show in season 3.
I think
and
he
season
wrote
4,
this very episode, actually. Yeah.
Oh, right, did he?
I might be wrong. Please correct me.
Because I thought that he didn't start writing until season 3.
Okay. Maybe I am being fed bad information.
Because a lot of these earlier episodes, especially season 1 and season 2, a lot of them are written by David Simon and Ed Burns. They kind of do quite a lot of the episodes.
I will...
I don't have that information in front of me right now, but yeah. So there's that moment in the book library, and D'Angelo gives us our epigraph where he's talking about the fact that you can't escape from your past, and again it ties into that Greek tragedy idea about people being on a destined path. D'Angelo speaking, very eloquently on the subject, and it's sad to see that his take on it is so kind of fatalist, but at the same time, he wants to take these years, he wants to take responsibility. He's clearly sick and tired of being able to get out of things just because someone's able to play some game and Avon's able to pull some strings. And he completely refuses to even talk to him when he sees him. So this kind of really nails it down. D'Angelo has completely shut himself off. And this ends up being interpreted as D'Angelo sort of being weak, and that he's now it's kind of caused him to be damaged in some way. But the opposite is true. He seems stronger. We see him flushing those drugs down the toilet. It seems like a mundane thing, but at the same time, it's symbolic of him wanting to get clean. He wants to kind of do it for real. So yeah, it's kind of very touching scene with his mother as well, and another incredible performance by Larry Gillard Jr. is really, really good.
Yeah, definitely. He really kind of steps up with the interpretation to end all other interpretations, and he's interestingly writing his own eulogy here, more or less, in that book club. Once you've seen it through, once everything that D'Angelo does in this episode stands as a very, very strong foreshadowing to the end of the episode. And they really plonk all the emotional scenes in the right places, particularly one of the Brianna's best scenes in the show, I think, where Dee turns his mum's life lessons back on her, and in this case standing up for himself means turning away from his mother and not buying into her deception of the Tillman setup that Avon is benefiting from. And it's an emotional farewell for these two, and you can see that there is genuine love between them, but they, a bit like Kima and Cheryl, just have different ways of viewing the world and looking at it, and there's no compatibility there really for long-term staying around. And we see that he'd rather leave his family behind to pursue that freedom that he finds behind these bars, as he has mentioned before. So very sad. Very, very sad.
Yeah. And then that leads us on to the final main strand, which is Stringer Bell delivering an envelope of cash to Leach, a contact from Washington, D.C. He's there to organise a contract killing and insists that he must not be made traceable to him. Later on, we see an inmate at the prison named Muggs, who follows D'Angelo around the library, gets him alone in a back room, and then assaults and strangles D'Angelo to death with a belt. Muggs positions the body and hands so that it appears to be a suicide by hanging.
Ouch.
And yeah, this is just kind of, really horrific, kind of harrowing ending scene of D'Angelo's death. And it's the real tragedy. I mean, I kind of touched on it a moment ago, is the fact that the way that Stringer has interpreted this in order to put out this hit is the opposite of what is true, and it's just his paranoia. He's seeing D'Angelo as being weak, that he's compromised the Barksdale organization in some way. But the truth is that if D'Angelo were left alone, he'd probably just do the years and be, kind of a model prisoner, I suppose.
He was building himself up in other ways. He's not into using that information to his advantage for any purpose at all. And
for all of their strength and all of their cash and all of their resources that the Barksdale organisation has, in a sense, D'Angelo now seems above that. He seems like he's kind of conquered that sense and he doesn't need it anymore. And yeah, that's kind of where it's just another one of those moments. It's just like Wallace, you feel such a strong sense of potential and what they could do and where they could go and how their mind frame and how their attitude has changed because of these accomplishments through the difficulties that they faced, and then it's just totally snuffed out. And Stringer is, this is really, really evil of Stringer. Like, it really kind of nails home for all of his smarts, and even if he does seem a little bit endearing with all of his business sense, Stringer is evil.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi,
Can you hear
I
me?
think you maybe it cut off for a couple of words there. Stringer is the last thing I heard.
All right. So yeah, it really kind of hammers home that there is real evil and malice in Stringer's actions.
Yeah, and it's incredible, really, how much you forget about this by come season 3, because, as you say, he is such a kind of an inspirational business figure who does want to change the game, not out of compassion for those who are dying, but out of respect for economics, I guess, and the efficiency of it all. And it's great, just kind of how ridiculous it is that you can get behind someone who causes this awful tragedy in this scene.
And he kind of effectively gets away with it as well. And I think to some extent that makes him more confident in pushing the boundaries even more. For example, later on when he goes behind Avon's back, and he puts pits Omar against Brother Mouzone, and it kind of emboldens him to take more risks, and that ends up being his downfall.
Yeah, very true. I found it interesting how they put the Stringer and the assassin scene early on in the episode. It's very kind of unusually deliberate withholding of information. I don't know if anyone watched it through first time and worked out what the scene was leading up to. Obviously, on the second time round, it makes a lot of sense, but it's be interested to see if anyone was kind of insightful enough to make the connection, because it's left fairly ambiguous.
Because Leach, the contact that he has, he kind of meets him in the car, and I swear he says something about that he has a cousin. Is it that Muggs is his cousin?
I imagine that may well be it, yeah.
I think that must be the connection.
And it's weird because we see throughout the episode D'Angelo being stalked by Muggs. But
yeah, there's quite a few occasions where he's kind of watching him move about, and there's that voyeuristic wire style of D'Angelo kind of being almost like squeezed between two bookcases, by the frame of the camera. And it's kind of, it's this sense of being squeezed tight, and obviously you get strangled. So it's kind of a nice visual preparation for what happens to him, and yeah, it's quite sinister him following around like that.
I mean, he certainly looks very sinister. The look on his face isn't subtle at all. But I never, for 1 second thought that they'd kill this character off, particularly, halfway through a season, totally out of the blue.
And one of the key characters from season 1 as well, really like a lead character who's a great actor and has one of the most sort of endearing stories in the whole show, and then
it's
they
a
just
real,
kill him off.
It's more Sean Bean than Sean Bean moments normally are. It's a complete out of the blue fluke death, and despite all that stalking that happens in the episode, I never would have seen it coming, and it really does shock. It really does, and it's just so strange because it's been foreshadowed throughout the entire episode. The book scene, the you know, the whole idea about the second acts in American lives. It's all there, but you never quite want to believe that that's actually what's about to happen. So it's a very, very effectively written set of events.
Yeah.
And we see that, you know, despite Brianna's pleadings to go back with Avon, they wouldn't have made a difference anyway, since Stringer's assassin mission has already been set up. So there was nothing to save there. And in the same way that the Greeks will dump their chemical trucks, as per Nick's instructions, Stringer's assassin will make it look like a suicide, although a very unconvincing one at that.
It's quickly debunked, isn't it? When it comes down to the investigation,
there's a possibility that the you know, is it Bugs, the cousin, or Muggs? Yeah, I mean Muggs probably does know that it's a very unconvincing suicide, but he also knows that the prison guards are dumb and won't be interested in investigating it. So
yeah, they don't want to have to deal with a homicide,
which is exactly what happens until McNulty starts digging and sniffing around later on.
Yeah, finally get something to do again.
And then it's odd to see how desensitized Muggs is as well, just straight out asking about his cigs and having a little laugh with his mate. It's just straight on to the next chapter. It's just...
Yeah, I mean, it's one of, when you talk about kind of the main themes of The Wire as a show, you know, you can kind of talk about the fall of the industrial American city and kind of all these, about the drugs and the poverty, and you know, there's so many different key themes that you can pick up on, but one that would immediately come to mind for me is desensitization towards violence, and the fact that crime and kind of violence can become so pervasive that people's reactions to it become totally surreal. And you really see that in the courtroom scene, for example, with Omar talking about it. And like I say, Levy's points are somewhat valid about the fact that he is somewhat amoral, because he's quite happy to go around, you know, brandishing weapons at people and shooting people and doing what he needs to do to follow his code. And like you say here with Muggs, immediately after killing D'Angelo, he walks straight out, smile on his face, greets a friend as if nothing had happened. And it's just everywhere in this show about people just, violence becoming something that you just deal with, you just brush off, you just, you know, death becomes of little consequence for some reason, and it's one of the most upsetting elements of the whole show, I think.
And there's just the shadow shoved under the door. That's all we have left of D'Angelo.
Yeah, it's a really, really harrowing final shot where he is just this forgotten about body behind a door. He's just a kind of silhouette.
That's what the criminal world has reduced him to. Yeah, so it's there's no room for a man with this conscience in this environment. It's certainly making its point strongly.
So yeah, is there anything else you want to say about this episode, kind of in general?
I think this has covered everything, really. Yeah, no, I'm happy. Should we move on to our final bits and pieces?
I was going to add one final point. We kind of touched on it slightly about sort of D getting killed off when he was such a big character, especially in season 1. This episode does have quite a strong focus on McNulty as well, and they're kind of both the key. Certainly in season 1, they were like the key characters of movement, narratively speaking. And they kind of both have this interesting parallel where they've both been punished for these actions that they've taken, that are sort of they've tried to sort of go that extra mile and be intuitive, and they've both been punished for it. And whereas D'Angelo is trying to get out of the family that he's been part of, McNulty is trying to get back into the family that he was part of. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a nice parallel there that's covered throughout the episode, and it's interesting that in the middle of season 2, we
refocus on them. We kind of catch up, don't we?
Yeah, we kind of come back to our season 1's main characters, which is an interesting move from a show that is, as we've demonstrated, not afraid to allow storylines to last for several seasons and, episodes upon episodes to go past before things get kind of resolved. And when they do get resolved, very rarely is it in a very nice way.
And we also see that both McNulty and D'Angelo here, both become obsolete in this episode. Both of them lose their relevance to the people around them. D'Angelo's no longer needed and he's taken out, and so is McNulty, really. He's got nothing left to be motivated by at the moment. And they're drifting away, so it's interesting to see It's a very good parallel that you picked up on there. I think it feeds very nicely into the title, which feels like a real landmark of a title, almost speaking about the show as a whole. That this is kind of a big point in the story where things are kicking off. Perhaps it's ironic that this is almost an epilogue episode, really, isn't it? It kind of feels like that, with D'Angelo's tail ending and McNulty's, big Barksdale effort finally collapsing, and he's feeling the problems with the boat and having nothing to do with himself. So
yeah, with that in mind, let's move on to our very final sections.
He's saying that the past is always with us. And where we come from, what we go through, how we go through it, all this shit matters. I mean, that's what I thought he meant.
Go ahead.
Like at the end of the book, you know? Boats and tides and all. It's like you can change up, right? You can say you somebody new, you can give yourself a whole new story. But what came first is who you really are. And what happened before is what really happened. And it don't matter that some fool say different, because the only thing that make you different is what you really do or what you really go through.
And we'll start with favourite scenes. So, I mean, boy, is this hard for this episode. I mean, seeing as it's consistently brilliant throughout. But is there anything that particularly jumps out at you? Anything maybe not so obvious that jumps out as you as a great scene in this episode?
I know I say it every week, but it's getting harder and harder and harder, and this is by far the hardest week. I mean, every scene is practically memorable, very memorable. The court scene, probably the top, so unique, very great to see Levy out of his comfort zone. Omar, I think, at the absolute peak of his character for me, as far as the show run goes. But there's so many other scenes to pick from. We have Prop Joe's scene at the shop, McNulty's dinner with Elena being very eye-opening. The ball scene, that was the funniest moment in the episode for me. The drinking scene that was turned on its head. I mean, the suicide scene, which was so incredibly graphically acted, so realistic as well. And something we forgot to mention really is how they kind of, it really was, for all intents and purposes, a real suicide. And the D'Angelo Brianna send-off, the D'Angelo Avon send-off, that was a kind of dialogue-free scene, but I thought that was a fantastic, really hard-hitting, emotional scene when D'Angelo and Avon see each other for the last time, and there's just absolutely no connection whatsoever. So
those close-ups on their faces as they kind of look towards each other, and Avon sees D'Angelo alive for the last time. Like, it's kind of a classic trick to focus up closely on characters' faces when there's a moment of real seriousness. Focus of facial expression just elevates the gravity of a situation, I guess. But on this occasion, you really do feel it, and even though it is wordless, it's another very, very painful scene involving D'Angelo.
But I mean,
But yeah, in general, I think I agree with what you said there. I think that there's just so many great scenes.
I've mentioned practically, I don't know how many I've mentioned, but there's plenty more, and all of them are very worthy winners, really. Although I think, for the purposes of the episode, that the court scene needs to be perhaps the favourite, as it is. It's kind of the landmark almost.
It's a defining scene of the whole show, and it's definitely a defining scene for Omar as a kind of icon of the show. So it's kind of got to be that one if you want to really go for it in a kind of quantitative way. So what about favourite characters? Again, it's going to be ridiculously difficult, and it makes perfect sense to be immediately gravitated towards D'Angelo, largely because Larry Gillard Jr.'s performance is stunning, and because it is his final episode. It's all about him in some ways. I mean, the title is about him, the epigraph is from him, the kind of theme of the show is very much tied into his arc, narratively speaking. So yeah, it's. I mean, I've got to say D'Angelo.
Absolutely,
basically.
I was very tempted by D'Angelo as well. I personally went for Omar. because I haven't chosen him yet. I don't think as one of my favourites. D'Angelo certainly got a couple of mentions last season, so I'm going to go with Omar because I'm not sure I'm going to mention him again. This is for me the peak of his character. I absolutely adore the courtroom scene, so I'm going to give it to Omar for blowing our minds to such an extent at the courtroom. I thought Bunk was fantastic as well, as was Sergei. This is probably Sergei's best episode. It's just a shame that he's so overshadowed by lots of other people in this episode.
Yeah. So, I think we sort of briefly touched on it before we started the final section, but our title, All Prologue, obviously coming somewhat from what Dee is saying about everything that's come before and everything that you've done, that's who you really are, and that it is inescapable and that you can't change what you've done. And as a result, you can't really change who you are. So yeah, it's quite an all-encompassing title, really, but obviously a key theme in this episode. Yeah,
and as I was saying, really, it's as far as as far as D'Angelo's kind of analysis of Great Gatsby is concerned, then it makes a lot of sense. But it's almost more of an epilogue. This episode, isn't it? It closes a lot of the chapters that started in season 1. So I kind of think it works both ways.
Yeah, this episode is, because I mean it's the halfway point, just numerically speaking, but it also is a dividing line between the first and second half of the season in terms of the story as well, because the consequences of these actions kind of brings the second half of the season into action. So I guess in that sense, everything before this episode is, it's all prologue.
And it's also...
And this is where we start to get epilogue.
As far as classic 3-act structures go as well, this is kind of the 20-episode mark. This is a third of the way into the show. And it feels like we've kind of got through our intro, and we're now moving on to the second act of the show, and things are going to change a lot from here on out. So I think that could be something it's going for as well. Think about it. Consequences are about to arrive for everyone. Everybody is prime. McNulty's ready to spiral out of control with no motivation to carry on. The towers are dying. As far as the Barksdale business is concerned, the details about to pounce on the docks. Plus, the Gantt murder sees some closure here, which is an important part of the act closing. The crew is starting to worry about Frank's leadership. Everything's brewing up, and it's been all a prologue so far.
Ziggy, kind of, as I mentioned before, he has his big moment later on. This is another moment where it's about to boil over for him.
So I'm a really big fan of this title, and I feel like it really speaks to the show on kind of a meta level more than the other titles do.
And then the epigraph follows pretty much the same theme, with D'Angelo saying in the book group scene, "It don't matter that some fools say he different." And that's where he's talking about, fronting this sort of different persona or trying to fake being someone. And he cites Gatsby having all these books, and that none of them, pages had never been turned.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of ties into the same themes and what you were saying already about, we're moving into a different track, and people have chosen their paths. Like Nick, for example, he's become very comfortable with the criminal activity that he's getting involved in. That's who he is now, and he's going to have to deal with the consequences of that and the decisions that he's made. Because, especially now that he's taking the drugs, he is entrenching himself deeply with the Greeks. And as we've seen with Frank, once you get in, it becomes very difficult to get out again, especially when you were put into it as in a position of desperation in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then they're going to find it very hard to become somebody else if they end up changing their mind. And in some ways, as D'Angelo says, it doesn't matter. That's who you are now. That's what you've done to get where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's that dishonesty idea really that runs through the show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, that kind of covers it all, I guess.
Absolutely. What an episode!
And absolutely
great
stunning
send off
episode.
for D'Angelo, our beloved D'Angelo. It's nice that he gets that second epigraph as a send off. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very powerful centre point for season 2. And like I mentioned at the start, easily one of the best episodes of the whole show. Just a really defining moment in The Wire and what it's trying to demonstrate.
It's certainly the best episode we've recapped on so far, I think. Of everything we've done.
And one of the most tragic as well.
Yeah.
It is quite consistently sort of sad. Moments of real kind of crushing realizations.
Which is...
So we've come to the centre of season 2, and Toby and I have decided that we are going to take a week's break until we come to episode 7. Partially because it's just nice to have a bit of a break, and when you're doing it week in, week out, it's quite a lot of work involved. So we're just going to take a short pause, and also it probably give a chance for our bandwidth to get back into action as well.
True, yeah.
Might help.
Definitely. So we'll take a week off. Backwash is up next in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, so the next episode will be out on the 27th.
That's right, 27th of February. Yeah.
So yeah, we will see you again then. Thank you very much for joining us. Check out the website, caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Feel free to send us any emails in the time that we are away, because obviously we'll just read them out when we come back to episode 7. So send them into caughtonthewire@gmail.com. There's also a contact form on the website itself if you want to use that instead. And we shall see you again on the 27th. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
See you then.
What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know